Hey, what's up, Spartan Nation? Welcome to another episode of the Spartan Nation Podcast. Matt Lonsberry, your host here with my co-host Aiden McCrone. And yeah, we're just going to talk about just a few updates on what's going on with Michigan State athletics right now. As always, feel free to drop questions in the comment section, and we'll answer as many of those as we can. Um, and with that, we'll get started. Yeah, so this is our first chance that we've had live since Payton Thorne committed to Auburn. It seems like it's been forever ago now because it's been almost a week, but our first chance to talk about it live. So, Aiden, I think this was kind of the expected destination. I think as soon as Payton hit the transfer portal, it seemed like Auburn was the first school that was started to be mentioned. And so not a major surprise, I don't think, but just to your reaction to Payton heading to an SEC school, and what do you think the fit is like down there?
Yeah, I mean, Auburn got a new head coach this offseason, Hugh Freeze. Uh, I mean, a lot of people will remember him from the times he was at Ole Miss. Besides the scandals on the field, he did beat Alabama twice. But I will say he did have a losing record in the SEC, which I think a lot of people just kind of overlook that because he
Yeah,
beat Alabama. I think it was back to back years. Um, so yeah, I mean, breaking in a new quarterback, he's been pretty good with the quarterbacks he's had. And a lot of them, weren't pro guys, but he has turned them into serviceable players. And obviously, we learned later or earlier this spring that Peyton Thorne was dealing with injuries basically all of last season. And, now that he says he's healthy, how will he impact Auburn this upcoming season? Because it seems to me that Auburn staff feels like a healthy Thorne can help them win, um, or you know, give them what they need in year one of a new head coach.
yeah. We talked about, I think maybe last time we were on how few quality quarterbacks are in the spring transfer portal window. And that was going to increase Peyton's value, regardless of what happened last year. And Auburn definitely was in need of adding another body there. TJ Finley was, I think, started the year as their starter last year. He gets hurt, um, gets replaced by this Ashford kid,
Yeah,
who kind
Robbie
of finished
Ashford.
Robbie Ashford, who finished the year for Auburn. But like you said, with the new coaching staff in there, um, they wanted to kind of like cast a wide net, and everybody's kind of starting from uh, from scratch there as far as making an impression on the coaches. And clearly, they thought that they needed to bring somebody in, and hey, if Peyton's healthy, um, I think I think he proved in 2021 that he's a good serviceable quarterback when healthy. Um, Last year didn't go the way any of us expected it to for him. But I don't think he as a quarterback is as bad as he looked at times last year, and perhaps he's not as good as he looked at times in 2021. I think it's somewhere in the middle. Um, and so yeah, if nothing else, I'm really intrigued to see how he performs down there. I'm going to be keeping an eye on that as the season kind of progresses. We probably won't talk about Peyton much after tonight's episode, just because I feel like we've talked about it quite a bit. And now that he's officially going on to Auburn, it's like, okay, we can put a pin in it. But um, the discussion might come up partway through the season of how he's doing. How is he doing compared to how Michigan State's new starting quarterback is doing? So it's going to be really interesting. I know it's apples to oranges a little bit when you're comparing two different teams, but there's there's definitely going to be comparisons to how he's doing down there in the SEC to based on how either Noah Kim or Caden Hauser are doing up here. And so I'm just really intrigued by that.
Yeah, I mean, but yeah, you talk about the Noah Kim, Caden Hauser. I think, we're also still holding out on Keon Coleman. We're still waiting on his decision. And I know people are saying he's being linked to Auburn. He did take a visit to Florida State this past week, and then I think he's at Ole Miss right now.
Yep.
And people are, yeah, so he's also being kind of linked to Auburn. So we'll see how that goes. And just for Peyton's performance, I remember after the Washington game, I did write an article saying, look, Payton Thorne is still, he still looked the part as the starting quarterback. I think people got a little restless after that game, just the way it went, because Washington was breaking in a new coaching staff, and, you know, were expected to not be that good. And then they ended up being really good and a top 10
Right.
team in the country. And I wrote an article, it was like, Payton Thorne, like, you still should believe in him. And, I thought he played well that game. And then it did, like, start to drop off during Big Ten play. The Minnesota game, they struggled. I don't think the starter scored. I think the backups were the ones that ended up scoring
Right.
their only points for that game. So yeah, I mean, yeah, like you said, Payton Thorne showed some glimpses, and I think that's really what Auburn is buying into right now, is just kind of turning those glimpses into more consistent play.
Yeah. I mean, I was kind of curious to where Michigan State's the fan base was, like the attitude towards Peyton now that he is officially on his way out. But at the same time, he did graduate from Michigan State. Like he has a degree now from Michigan State. And so I was a little bit curious about what people's thoughts were towards him. And so I posted a poll on our Facebook page, and that's exactly what I asked. I said, which best describes your attitude towards Peyton Thorne after he transferred to Auburn? And the options I gave were, I'm rooting for him. I hope he flourishes. I hope he does well, but not too well. Indifferent. I don't care how he plays, and I'm rooting against him. I hope he fails. So I kind of gave, a pretty wide variety there, and I was pleasantly surprised with the results of the poll. It's been up for a little over 24 hours now. 41% actually say that they're rooting for Peyton and hope he flourishes, which I am surprised about. Like I thought that would get um, some some uh, some people would vote that way, but I wasn't expecting 41% to vote that way. 5% voted hope he does well, but not too well. um, I expected a little bit more there because I can kind of see how, yeah, I'm not going to root against the guy. I hope he does okay, but maybe not better than Michigan State's next guy. Like I guess that would be a reasonable answer. The one I expected to do the best was indifferent. I don't care how he plays, and that is leading the poll at 50% of voters, and then only 4% have voted rooting against him, hope he fails. So again, based on some of the comments that I've read underneath our stories about the transfers and things like that, I would have thought that more people were anti-Thorne or uh, rooting against him. But again, pleasantly surprised by the results of those polls. 641 votes. I know that's a small sample size of the fan base as a whole, but thought that was interesting. So I guess I'll pose the question to you, Aiden. It's just as a Michigan State student. Your thoughts on Peyton, like final thoughts on Peyton heading to Auburn.
Yeah, I mean, I wish him the best. Like, I hope he flourishes too. Obviously, I mean, it's hard to root against any player, really. Just, I mean, like, he really didn't, like, his performance obviously wasn't what fans wanted and was a little bit underwhelming last season. But just as a person, he seems like a perfectly fine person. Like, there's
Yeah,
no reason to be mad at him for any reason. Obviously, you can't entirely put the blame on him for, the fan, you can't put the blame on him for the fan base torturing him. And, obviously it was part of his performance, but he really didn't, like, hurt anyone all of
sure.
last season, and he seemed to be the leader of that team, and, someone who was well liked by his peers and by his coaches. So, I mean, just for that reason, like, obviously, like, wish him the best. And yeah, that's where I'm at.
Yeah, and I think it kind of, I mean, again, it's a small sample size, this poll that I put out, but it kind of once again proves the fact that um, the worst part of every fan base seems to be the loudest part of every fan base. So I think
Hmm.
that's kind of a case right here too, where the angry mob portion of, and this goes for every fan base that are across the country, but the angry mob portion of the fan base, they're going to be the loudest. They're going to make sure their voices are heard. And most reasonable, level-headed people probably aren't in comment sections sharing their opinion all that much, unless it's a positive thing. So good to see. But yeah, and I will kind of reinforce that. Um, just kind of when Peyton was available for media availability, all that, he was always generous with his time. He did come across as a really good dude. So tough to see him walk away. Would have liked to see him get a chance to maybe re-earn that starting job and kind of prove some of those doubters wrong at Michigan State this year. But he'll still have that opportunity at Auburn. You mentioned Keon Coleman a little bit earlier. He did take a visit to Florida State. He's currently on a visit, or at least I think he went to Ole Miss yesterday. I don't know if he's still down there in Mississippi right now or not, but um, he is in that process of kind of exploring his options. And so we can kind of transition into that. Uh, I guess my perspective is when Keon first entered the portal, there was some rumblings about, Michigan State still has a shot here to reel him back in, maybe with an NIL offer or something of that nature. I'm not completely closing the door on that, but it does kind of feel like to me, the longer this kind of stretches on, the less likely that option is. So, where are your thoughts at with Keon at the moment?
Yeah, I'm kind of along the lines with you that he seems more out the door than more likely to come back. Uh, I mean, the list of visits he's taking keep adding up.
Right,
We didn't really hear about Ole Miss or Florida State like when he initially entered the portal. We heard, I mean, we might have heard Florida State, but we heard USC, Tennessee, Miami, and LSU
right,
mainly. So yeah, hearing Florida State, hearing Ole Miss, potentially hearing Auburn now as well. Like if these visits keep adding up, or these kind of teams of interest keep adding up, my guess is he's for sure out the door and not gonna come back to MSU. And it did seem like he liked his visit to Florida State. He did post a lot of pictures there.
right.
So yeah, we'll see where that goes. I mean, I would think he'd commit within the next couple of weeks, so that will be something to keep an eye on in the near future.
Yeah, I had heard, and this isn't like verified or anything like that, but I had heard that he's going to kind of continue to take visits throughout the month of May, and then has like the end of May as kind of his target date
Mm.
for a decision. I don't, again, that's not like confirmed or anything like that, but that's just something that I heard, kind of through the grapevine a little bit. Um, but yeah, he has heard from a lot of different teams since entering the portal. There was a graphic that went up a few days ago on Twitter that showed uh, like almost 60 teams had reached out and contacted Keon since he had entered the transfer portal. We know a few schools had contacted him before he had even entered the transfer portal. And I think that number, I think it was 59 when that graphic went up, and I think that number has even grown since then. But it's kind of interesting to see some of the teams that were on that graphic. I was surprised a little bit to see Michigan on there, for instance. I guess maybe I shouldn't be, because Keon's a good player, and he's going to get interest from a lot of different schools, but I don't think Michigan has any shot. Period. Georgia's on there. Colorado, of course, is on there because they're just reaching out to just about anybody. TCU, Georgia Tech, Texas A&M, Nebraska, Kentucky, USC, Tennessee, Oklahoma, Maryland, Notre Dame, Auburn is on here. So yeah, obviously a very wide net of interest. Um, so yeah, just it'll be interesting to see how this kind of recruitment period for him plays out as well. And I do want to address the Auburn thing a little bit, just because when Keon and Peyton first entered the portal, there was, I don't want to put it, there was a report out there that uh,
Peyton and Keon didn't. Yeah, Keon didn't really want to
play.
play that
They
much
don't
with.
want,
Yeah.
yeah, they didn't want to play with each other, or
Mhm.
Keon didn't want Peyton to be his quarterback.
Right.
And then like a few weeks later, like the day that Peyton commits to Auburn, there's a report out there that Keon's going to go visit Auburn. Well, that didn't kind of those two stories don't really mix together. I don't think the
Mhm.
Auburn visit ever happened. Um, if it did, Keon never posted pictures, and word never got out. So I highly doubt that Auburn visit actually happened. I don't know where that report came from, but it doesn't sound like uh, Auburn is in the picture at this time, at least.
Mhm.
Um, so, but again, there's more drama kind of to the whole situation with Peyton and Keon. I did again. This is all secondhand stuff. It's not verified reporting by me or anything like that. But I did hear that Peyton and Keon did have a conversation after that initial story came out. Um, and there was a picture on social media of them all at like a Lansing Lugnuts game together too. Like Peyton and Keon were there, and several other Michigan State players. So it doesn't seem like there's any like personal beef between
Mhm.
the players or anything like that. It's just kind of one of those things where Keon's doing what he thinks is best for him. Peyton's now doing what he thinks is best for him, and that's just the way it is. So, uh, yeah. So it's hard to say that Keon's leaning one way or another right now as far as uh, a team that he's leading towards. Obviously, Florida State and Ole Miss got visits, so they you can kind of put them up as some of the top contenders. I definitely believe LSU will continue to be a contender for him. USC for sure. Tennessee wouldn't surprise me, um, but I'm just gonna have to wait and see a little bit longer to see how many more visits that he takes and to see how this plays out. And then again, maybe Michigan State does throw a bigger NIL opportunity at him, and that's enough to bring him back. I would just put the chances of that at a pretty low percentage right now. We do have a question here from Joey. Do you guys think Tucker and the other coaches are still trying to convince Keon to stick around, or is it more the ship has sailed, next man up? Um, I think I'm sure Tucker and the coaching staff have made their pitch. I'm sure they've done their due diligence as far as looking to outside sources to try to get that NIL opportunity for Keon. I would imagine Michigan State is close as far as a dollar amount that they're offering. And when I say Michigan State, I don't mean the university. I mean the collectives that support the universities and such. I know it's all confusing nowadays, but so yeah, I think they did their due diligence. I don't know right now specifically if they are still pursuing him or not. Um, so we're just gonna have to wait and see at the end of May, kind of where things stand. Any thoughts on that, Aiden?
Yeah, well, I mean, Tucker was at the Nuggets game with Ishbia last night, so that
Yeah,
might be why he was there. But
yeah,
in all seriousness, I think they are trying, but I don't think they're, pushing or like over trying. I don't think they're holding their breath really on that. I think they're moving, looking at the portal, looking for other options potentially that are more of players that will be guaranteed to come play with them next year rather than kind of not really play a game, but in a sense, but play a game of just kind of, with Keon because because yeah, he did say he's looking at his options, but I do think he is more out the door than coming back.
right. Um, Kind of sticking with Michigan State's wide receiver room as it stands right now. Aiden, you wrote an article pretty recently. I haven't published it yet, but about Michigan State's wide receiver room and how things look right now. What's your perspective on that heading into summer conditioning? I know Michigan State is still exploring some wide receiver options in the portal, but um, I guess you share your insight on who they're pursuing in the portal, who's already in the room, young guys coming up. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I mean, just to start for who's in the room, obviously you have Trey Mosley. He's the veteran there. He could potentially be one of the team captains this season. He's one of the older players just in that offense in general. and then you got a lot of guys who are young, or you got a lot of guys who are inexperienced. So you have players. I talked about the 2022 class. Obviously, Jeremy Bernard transferred to Washington, but you do have three other receivers in that class. You have Antonio Gates Jr., Tyrell Henry, and Jerron Glover. And all three of those players have really uh, been catching fans' attention and coaches' attention in the off season so far. Uh, Glover had some nice plays in practice that the team posted. Obviously, Gates had that big catch at the end of the spring practice, the open practice, and then Henry has really kind of played the most so far. He played a lot on special teams last year. He's My guess is he's going to be the main kick returner and punt returner next season for MSU. And then, all three of those guys could definitely play. And then you got older players who are kind of waiting for their opportunity. You have Christian Fitzpatrick. He's a transfer from, I want to say he transferred from Louisville in 2021. So he's a guy that's really waiting for his opportunity, who probably could have gotten some offers and gone elsewhere, but he's stuck with it here. So you could look for him this season. And then yeah, they're exploring the portal still. I know for the 2024 class, they're getting some recruits there, or they're looking at some high four stars there. I know a lot of recruits and players have a lot of respect for Coach Hawkins, the wide receivers coach. Seeing that Jaden Reed got drafted in the second round last season, then Jalen Naylor in, I want to say, the sixth round in the 2022 draft. And Naylor has really gotten an opportunity to play in Minnesota and will probably be on their roster again this season. So, I mean, the fact that they just got two NFL guys, or two guys drafted into the NFL back to
Yeah.
back years, I think there's some respect, and he's really gaining some steam and credibility on the recruiting trail. And then just the way these guys are developing. I mean, he developed Keon Coleman. So just in that sense, I think they're going to be fine no matter what, as long as Hawkins is there.
Yeah, we're getting a question about, I think is it Harrell, the wide receiver from Alabama? I think that's his
I
last
can't
name.
remember his last name.
Yeah, I haven't heard any like new specific update about him. I think he was on campus, but Michigan State's keeping their like official visits for the transfer portal pretty close to the vest right now, so it's kind of hard to say. I definitely think that he's an option. Um, I've heard some rumblings about AJ Henning from Michigan. I don't know again how realistic that is for an option. There's a Division II wide receiver from Grand Valley who has I think he's been offered by Michigan State. He's probably, I mean, if he's at Grand Valley, I'm sure he's been
Yeah.
on campus at Michigan State. And this
Mhm.
isn't just your typical Division II player trying to make a huge leap. Like this guy is a pretty coveted guy right now. I know Texas A&M has also offered him, and if Texas A&M is involved, then there's probably a lot of money involved. Number one, or I mean, I don't know for a kid of from Grand Valley State, but if Texas A&M is interested, that means that you can play football at a high level. So yeah, that would be one to keep an eye on as well. Um, Things have just been a little bit slower than I anticipated, maybe slower than fans anticipated when all this kind of stuff started happening. Um, as far as like Payton entering the portal, Keon entering the portal. Charles Brentley stepped in for a couple of days and then withdrew his name, and you kind of got the sense because things were happening so fast then that Michigan State would also move quickly to add some pieces. That hasn't really played out. Maybe that was just unrealistic expectations on our part. But it has been interesting that I'm surprised that not one wide receiver has been brought in yet. But Michigan State has added some guys on the defensive side. Um, Names are escaping me right now. I know a safety from Cincinnati, Amarian Smith. TCU. Keon Stewart, I want to
Yeah.
say from TCU was a recent addition. That's a guy who can immediately is going to be in the two deep. I think for a cornerback rotation. Maybe he's a starter. We'll see how that plays out with some other guys there. So yeah, it's kind of still a bit of a wait and see approach with Michigan State and who they're exploring at wide receiver. I would be stunned if they don't add somebody in from the portal to add to their wide receiver room. But to your point, Aiden, and back to the guys who are currently in the room, Tyrell Henry, I know, is a guy who generated quite a bit of buzz during spring practice. Obviously, Antonio Gates Jr. He has the name with what his dad was able to do in the NFL. I think he's a Hall of Famer.
Yeah.
So obviously, his name adds a lot of, I don't want to say pressure, more like expectation to Antonio Gates Jr. But also, he's a guy who throughout his life um, has worked on his game throughout. Like if you're the son of an NFL player and you have a desire to play football, you have access to just so many opportunities that most young kids don't have, and so there's a lot of expectation there, I'm sure. The interesting thing about Michigan State's wide receiver room is that Mosley's a pretty proven guy in the slot. Um, and I like the young options that Michigan State has there. It's just that we haven't seen it yet. We haven't seen any proof in the pudding on the field type of thing yet from those guys. Doesn't mean they can't play. Doesn't mean that Michigan State's in trouble. It's just that we have to see it before we really know what to
Right.
expect. So, any other thoughts on the wide receivers?
Yeah, I know they're still working on I remember his first name is Jade, the guy from Grand Valley. He's kind of a more Keon esque player. He's 6'4". He's got a large frame. The receiver from Alabama, I can't remember his name, but he's more of a speed player. I think he's like a 5'11", like 6 foot kind of guy that's a track star. And then I can't remember the name of the guy from Nebraska too. I think he's still uncommitted, and I know he did take a visit to the spring game. So just those three guys, I think they're still working on them, and I'm sure they're still trying to find some other guys in the portal that they can get before June.
Right. I know you mentioned Christian Fitzpatrick a little bit earlier, Aiden, but just any follow up thoughts with him?
Yeah, I mean, I do think he is a real option right now. Obviously, that Keon Coleman is gone, and likely if he doesn't come back, he's for sure an option, potentially a starter. I think it really depends on that sophomore class coming up with Jerron Glover and Antonio Gates Jr. and how those two will play in summer and fall camp. And depending on that, I think Fitzpatrick is a real option either way.
Right. Um, Moving on a little bit to, I want to talk about a little bit about Michigan State's recruiting for 2024, and they're off to a bit of a slow start in terms of numbers, um, but they have added, or they have a couple of four-star corners in their recruiting class in Jalen Thompson and Jamari Howard. Jamari Howard being a fringe top 100 type player, and I know a lot of programs are still after him. Florida State again is one of those programs who is heavily involved in his recruitment, trying to flip him. But for now, he's still committed to Michigan State. But I wanted to ask you, Aiden, where is your level of concern, I guess, with the 24 class, just based on the low numbers on April 10th or May 10th here? Um, are you concerned at all?
Not really. I think after July, when you have visits, and I mean they still have a ton of official visits scheduled. I mean, a player that comes to mind is Nick Marsh. He was committed
Yeah,
to MSU, and he still has scheduled his official visit in July. So, or June. I can't remember. Yeah, I'm so burnt out. I can't remember, but yeah,
It's all good.
the yeah. So, anyways, I do think that they will probably lose some guys that will be committed. I don't know if it's Howard or Thompson or somebody else, but I do think they will lose guys, but I do think they will get a lot of numbers come visit season, and then as they work into the season. They did get in 2022, they did get all pretty much all their commits and had a top 25 class before they even went 11-2. Last season, a little bit of the same before they went 5-7. They had most of their class filled out. So I do expect them to gain a lot of commitments within the next 3 months, and just yeah, taking those official visits, getting to know those that coaching staff, and the coaching staff getting to know those players better. I think the one thing we've heard that's consistent about this coaching staff is how much they're liked by all the players that come there. I
Yeah.
think there's a lot of external factors that are the reasons why they're not getting higher numbers, but I wouldn't expect a top 25 class again, but it wouldn't surprise me though if Mel Tucker has another top 25 class, because they have been recruiting better than ever within the past 2 years. So that's something. But just the way they've handled the transfer portal, I I'll be interested to see the numbers, because they didn't get the numbers they thought they would get out of high school recruits last season, and I
Right.
think this is really a year for them to prove that they're going to be more committed to getting high school recruits, and getting more than 20 guys out of high school.
Right. And just wanted to give a little shout out to Jot Bear for answering it. Nick Marsh is taking an
Yeah.
official to Michigan State in June and will make a decision in July. So thank you, Jot Bear. Um, yeah. So honestly, like obviously with recruiting, how you finish is much more important than how you start. Like you can
Mhm.
start out great, but if you lose, if some guys slip midway through, and then on signing day you lose a couple more, like that's not great. Like starting well in April didn't do a whole lot of good. And so I say that to say, if Michigan State finishes well, nobody's going to remember that on May 10th they only had 4 commitments.
Mhm.
Um, and they do have, like you said, some guys who can change the narrative of this class really quickly. One of those guys is Zadavian Sims, who announced today a top 5 that included Michigan State, Oklahoma, Oregon, Vanderbilt, and TCU. Vanderbilt's kind of the strange one in there for me, but just that's just me talking. And he's going to make his decision on May 20th. He's an Oklahoma native, so obviously the Sooners are going to be tough to beat for Michigan State. Anytime Oregon's involved in a recruiting battle, you know that's going to be tough to beat them too, because Oregon has deep pockets. Um, and so, depending on how badly why they want a kid, that can be a tough obstacle to overcome. Michigan State still has 4 crystal balls on them for Zadavian Sims, though I think it's important to note that those crystal balls were placed in November. And in November, Marco Coleman was still the defensive line coach. Brandon Jordan was still on staff as the pass rush specialist. Obviously, those 2 guys are gone now. Bring in Dyron Reynolds, who early reports on him is that he's connected well with players, and then he's connected well with recruits as well. So good on Mel for bringing in a guy who can kind of immediately jump back into things as far as on the recruiting trail with the defensive line. So we'll see how that plays out. But that's a guy who, if Michigan State can go into Oklahoma and steal a guy from OU's backyard, that's a huge win, and immediately again changes kind of the perspective on what we've seen from the class so far. Nick Marsh coming in July, that decision, a guy that who was already in the class decided to step out, take a little bit more time to make sure he was making the right decision. But by all accounts, again, Michigan State is right there in his recruitment still. Um, so yeah, we just kind of got to see how these different things play out. But once again, Mel Tucker and his staff, as much criticism has been launched their way over the last calendar year, and a lot of it warranted, some of it maybe not. But again, they continue to be in these recruiting battles for high profile guys and guys that Michigan State typically didn't go after under the previous regime, and in regimes past. So we'll see how that plays out for the program as a whole. But just being in the conversation, there's something to that. So, um, what are your thoughts, I guess, on Zadavian Sims, Nick Marsh, where those guys are at in their recruitment?
Yeah, I mean, I think Nick Marsh, he committed pretty early. So I think he's just exploring other options. I mean, I think it's kind of up in the air right now. It's a little too early still to decide where, or like kind of predict where he's going to go. I think Sims is in the same boat. I know there's a question about if Sims commits, do you think Stone commits?
Yeah,
So they go to the same trainer in
yeah,
Oklahoma. They don't play high school together, but
right,
they do go to the same trainer, and that is the same trainer that Bai Job went to. So that there's kind of a little bit of a connection between Mel Tucker and that there's this little gym in rural Oklahoma that all these 4 and 5 star linemen go to. So yeah, I think just for in that sense, I do think MSU has a leg up in terms of having the connections. Now, if you count in the other factors like you were talking about, competing with the Oregons, the Oklahomas for NIL, I think that's a whole different ball game, but also a very large factor in this day and age of college football. But I do think Sims would recruit Stone. I don't see why not. Um but yeah, I think they're two very separate players, and yeah, I don't really have enough details on that to say how close they are. But yeah, I know they're both looking at a lot of similar schools. I know
right.
Stone it's pretty clear he's down to Oklahoma, MSU, and I think there's one other school is like Miami or somebody like that,
Right.
that he's really looking into.
Yeah, I'll just say on that, and I wrote a story today once Zadavian Sims put Michigan State in his top five. I don't think that those two are guaranteed to play together in college, but I will say if Michigan State does land Sims, that can only help your recruiting efforts
Right.
with Stone to say, hey, buy Jobs from Oklahoma. We brought him in. I'm sure those guys know who know each other, at least on a semi-regular basis. And then Sims and Stone going through the same trainer. I'm sure they've had some discussions over the last several months or maybe a year or so. So yeah, it certainly would help. Um, but yeah, those are individual recruitments. That's not a package deal or anything like that. But again, it wouldn't hurt. I'm gonna backtrack a little bit because we had a question a little bit earlier from Thad, asking, would you rather play veterans and key positions, go 6-6, you get a bowl game, or young talent, uh, give the young talent a chance to shine? I don't know that these two things are entirely separate. For instance, I don't think by playing the young talent that you have a higher risk of missing a bowl game. That might not be the case. So yeah, I think earning bowl eligibility should be the baseline goal for this season, just based on the schedule that they're going to face, the roster turnover that they've experienced, with guys going to the NFL, and then some of these guys that have entered the portal. There's a lot of as you mentioned, key positions that need to be filled, and roles that need to be kind of ironed out. So yeah, I don't think these two things are separate. As far as what's better for the future, um, that's probably playing the young talent. I would guess, but again, immediate future or long term future, because if you are sitting a veteran who can help you immediately, maybe that hurts some of the recruiting momentum that you've got because you're not performing as well as a team, and so prospects look at that and say, well, you went 5-7 again, so I'm not really going to consider you. So it's a kind of a complicated question, but I don't think the two things are. I don't think it's a black and white situation. We'll just have to wait and see who wins those jobs, and whether it's a young guy or one of the veterans.
Yeah, I think no matter who you add in the portal, you're still going to have one of the hardest schedules in the country.
Right.
And so just for that reason, I think they have as good a chance of going 6-6 with the young guys than they do, adding some transfer veterans. And guys who are still available probably most of the time it means they either transferred really late or teams aren't as interested in them, or a player is looking to start on a team when the coaching staff feels that they're kind of more insurance players. So just all those reasons, I think playing the young talent is definitely going to help them more, just this season and then in the near future, in the future for years to come as well.
Right. And just another question from Cameron that I wanted to get to. What's the scoop with Big Ten teams not playing Power Five non-conference games once UCLA and USC join the Big Ten? And then takes a dig at Michigan's non-conference schedule, which has been trash. It will be trash this year in 2023, and it was really bad last year too. Um, I didn't. I've heard this kind of buzz on social media with Big Ten scheduling. I haven't read the article yet, or have you, Aiden, about what's going on with the Big Ten scheduling?
No, I have not.
I've heard just a little bit, but I haven't really looked into it yet. So, but I will say, just kind of on a broader sense, with realignment going on across, with Texas and Oklahoma headed to the SEC. Obviously, the West Coast teams coming over to the Big Ten. I hate realignment. I really do. I'm a traditionalist when it comes
Yeah.
to college football. I wish, I wish Texas A&M was still in the Big 12 and they were playing Texas every year. I wish. I hate the fact that Bedlam, Oklahoma, and Oklahoma State is in jeopardy because Oklahoma's leaving the Big 12 for the SEC. I think about it this way: like, can you imagine if Michigan and Michigan State didn't get to play every year? Like, that would be horrible. As for somebody who grew up in the state and grew up watching that game, I would hate that. And so I can only imagine how uh, natives of Oklahoma feel about that. Um, at the same time, I understand why realignment is happening. It's all about television revenue and those contract deals that these conferences are getting from ESPN and Fox and CBS and these bigger TV networks. That's what it's all about. And so I understand why it's happening. I hate that it's happening. Um, and yeah, this is gonna be one of the things that is impacted by that because, like, for instance, if a Big Ten team or let's just throw we'll use it for Michigan State. If Michigan State has its Big Ten schedule come out and they've got to play USC and Ohio State and Michigan all in the same year, yeah, you're not going to go schedule an SEC opponent. You're not going to go schedule TCU or Baylor or one of these other opponents that you like. For instance, we got to see Michigan State go over to Oregon a few years ago, and then Oregon came to East Lansing for a home and home. Those things are going to go away because, like, your schedule's already challenging enough that you don't need to go out of your way to schedule tough opponents. Michigan State, unfortunately, is kind of being uh, punished a little bit for that this coming year. They got Washington on the schedule again, in addition to Penn State, Ohio State, and Michigan. Like, that's another potentially top 10 preseason team that you willingly scheduled. I admire the guts that it takes to go schedule a Power Five opponent out of conference. I would like to see more of that, but with this realignment stuff, you're just going to see less and less. And I think that overall is a net negative for the sport.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm with you on that. I don't really like realignment at all. I'm kind of anti-playoff expansion as well. I think
I am
going
too.
to 12 teams or even 8 teams is a little ridiculous. But I know, looking at it, I think what they're gonna end up doing is going to pods. So they're gonna do pods of 4 and have 4 divisions in the conference, and then kind of go from there. So you'll have 3 teams that you'll play. Excuse me. You'll have 3 teams that you'll play every year, and then you'll kind of rotate pods and stuff. I think is a little bit like the NFL in that sense. But yeah, I wonder how they'll do that, and then also how they'll handle that with the Big Ten championship. I don't know if they'll take just the teams with the two teams with the best records, or they'll do a 4 team kind of Big Ten championship and then lead to the playoff. I think I think at the end of the day, the NCAA and just college football kind of top teams and stuff, they want to play more games and get more revenue. So that's really what they're going for. So I think just I don't like it, but I think it devalues a lot of the regular season games, and but they want to see more games because that gets them more money.
Right. And I'm with you on that too. As far as the expansion of the playoff, those graphics you see at the end of every season, where if we had 12 teams, such and such would be playing who and such, and I get all that, and sure, it's fun to think about. But to your point, the regular season games are gonna, like, there's a cost to that too, and that is regular season games don't mean quite as much as they used to. Just think about, I know Ohio State and Michigan both went to the playoff last year, and it was the first time that the Big Ten conference had two playoff teams. But just think about how important that game was in the grand scheme of college football. You throw in a 12 team playoff, and yeah, it's still Michigan Ohio State, and it's still the game, and as far as like Midwest games, it's still at the top of the list, but there's not that added sense of urgency there. Whereas we have to win this, or we have no chance at playing for a national championship. So some of that's going to be lost, and that's unfortunate. Again, I understand the reasons, but and we're going to get some good matchups too. Like there's positives and negatives to just about anything, but yeah, overall, if I was the king of college football, I would not have expanded to 12 teams, but I'm not the king of college football. We had a couple other questions here. Another one from, let's see. Uh, oh, just a good point. A good point here from Keys to Wisdom. If we played Miami, Ohio at home instead of Washington on the road, we go to a bowl game. That's a good point. That's you're probably right about that. And that's again the cost of having guts and scheduling a Power Five opponent. Now I don't know when it was announced that Michigan State would play a home and home with Washington. But I know Washington, going back a few coaches, Steve Sarkisian was there for a little while and kind of had them kind of on an upper trajectory until I think he went to USC, and then eventually he got in some trouble and got fired there. But then Chris Peterson comes in, leads Washington to the playoff. That was probably around the time maybe that Michigan State had scheduled this home and home. So that was a good program. My point is, I think Washington was already kind of on its way back up when Michigan State added them as a future opponent. And then they dipped with I can't remember his first name, but his last name was Lake. It was
Jim
Peterson's
Lake.
Jimmy Lake. He was Chris Peterson's defensive coordinator. He was there for a year, got fired. They could just kind of tell things were going down quick. And then they bring in Kalen DeBoer, and he kind of hits a home run in his first season, leads them to 11 wins. So yeah, it's unfortunate that Michigan State's being punished for being bold, but the solution to that is pull off an upset. And then if that happens, all of a sudden you're probably 3-0, having beaten Central, Richmond, and then if you pull an upset against Washington, and all of a sudden you're kind of knocking down the door of the top 25 again. Wouldn't that be something? Some way
Yeah,
to start the regular season this fall.
definitely.
So, but a good point by Keys to Wisdom there. Another question we had from Kyle. Over under is 4.5 games. I think that was on Caesar Sportsbook, had the win total at 4.5 game, which obviously is discouraging. I think heading into last season, I want to say the over under was at 7.5. And I would have bet the over last year. I was kind of in that 9-3, 8-4 range last season. So that I'm not a gambler, and that kind of goes to show why I'm not a gambler, because I would probably get addicted pretty quickly, and I would probably lose a lot of money. So that's why I don't do it. But yeah, what are your thoughts on the over under, Aiden? 4.5. That seems, again, I'm probably putting myself out here a little bit, but that seems a little low, even with everything that's kind of
Mhm.
gone on over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, I mean, I still feel like you're not really an optimist if you take the over. I don't think you're too crazy if you take the over because all you're asking for is 5 wins. So
Right.
yeah, that doesn't seem like a hard ask. In terms of its importance to recruiting and branding, I don't think it really affects it at all in terms of recruiting high schoolers. I think it affects it a lot more in terms of the transfer portal. I think
That's a good
from
point.
what we've seen with with Keon in terms of teams will teams have seemed to negatively recruit towards transfers more than high school players at this point in time, just because if you have a player on a team that didn't make a bowl game and they're a proven commodity, I think they're gonna use that against you more than a high school player who's completely unproven. And we did see they pulled in a top 25 class after the COVID year going whatever 2-5, and they got a top 25 class, and majority of those commits were all before the season started. And
Right.
then last year they held on to a majority of the commits they got even after a 5-7 season. So I think it doesn't really affect their high school recruiting. In terms of brand, I mean, I feel the same way. I think it's really up to kind of the culture of the program rather than kind of Vegas odds to determine how their brand is doing.
Yeah, and part of that too is if Michigan State can still get guys on campus despite the 5-7 record last year, that gives the coaches an opportunity to explain firsthand, hey, this is where things kind of went off the rails, and develop those relationships. I think we haven't seen it come to fruition as in the form of like commitments and verbal pledges so far in 2024, but we have seen a lot of interest from, again, those higher end prospects, getting them on campus. I know Michigan State is kind of in the fold for several four-star running backs. One who's committed to Florida right now. They're bringing him on campus. So if you can get guys on campus and have those conversations, that's such a big key. Now, yeah, you've gotta. It is very important to show some progress this season. Um, after last year's disappointment, but we've talked about this a little bit. Progress doesn't necessarily have to be like the wins and loss columns. Now, obviously, that's the bottom line. And
Mhm,
so, if you go 6-6, if you go 7-5, you have proof right there on paper. Hey, we're trending in the right direction. But of Michigan State's 7 losses last year, 6 of them I think were by double digits. So can you be competitive against Michigan? Can you be competitive against Ohio State, Washington, Penn State? Can you go on the road against Iowa or Minnesota and come up with a big road win in one of those two games? Like it's little things right now that you've got to kind of build on to kind of get things headed back into the right direction, and that's what it's going to come down to. Um,
mhm.
this was an interesting question that I'm going to throw up here from Cameron. What's your best guess? Which MSU player, either in basketball or football, has the highest NIL deal? That's a great question. Um, any thoughts on that, Aiden? I'm,
I'm gonna say Tyson Walker. I think
that's a
I
good.
feel like that's an obvious choice, but maybe it could be one of the incoming freshmen, maybe Booker, Carr, potentially Akins or Hogard. But I think it's Walker right now.
That's a good answer. I don't know if it's just because, as far as like American sports, football is king, but I kind of tend to think that it would normally be a football player, but with Michigan State being traditionally more of a basketball school, it would make sense for it to be a basketball guy. I think Walker's a good answer there. But to play, not really devil's advocate, but to kind of go the other side and thinking football, man, it's so hard right now just because obviously Keon would have been the immediate answer for football.
Right.
Payton probably would have been up there, and both those guys are gone. Um, I'm like Hauser's kind of coming to mind, but he hasn't played. Well, he's played like 6 snaps of football, so it's hard to imagine
Windman.
he's. Windman's up there, but the thing with the tunnel and getting suspended, I don't know. Like maybe that impacted. I
Hmm.
don't know if it did or not, but so yeah, that's tough. But yeah, I think I would probably lean towards. Um, Yeah, I think I would lean towards Hauser just because he's that 4-star kid and he's generated a lot of excitement. I'm probably way off on that, but that would be my. You said best guess. That's my best guess. So
Yeah.
for football, um, where would we rank Michigan State's roster versus their opponents? Well, let's go through the schedule. Central, they got a better roster than
Yeah.
Central. They've got a better roster than Richmond. I think Washington certainly offensively has a better roster. I think defensively you could make an argument. I think between Washington and Michigan State, but Washington's offensive talent lifts them above.
Mhm.
And then they host Maryland.
Yeah, I
Uh,
think that's pretty split. I think that's a little 50-50 as well. I think they've done well enough in the transfer portal and in high school recruiting and retaining guys that they're pretty even.
yeah,
I could give the edge to I would probably give the edge to MSU just overall, but Maryland does have a pretty decent squad in terms of what they got in the portal as well for talent.
yeah. I mean, the interesting with Maryland is with Tagovailoa coming back. Obviously, they have a huge edge in experience at quarterback.
Mhm.
But he can be really good, and then he can make a throw that is just like, what are you doing? So it remains to be seen what we're gonna get out of the quarterback position at Michigan State. But yeah, so maybe I'm with you there. I think Michigan State and Maryland's rosters are probably comparative on an equal level. Iowa's next. The funny thing about Iowa is based on like recruiting rankings, they always seem to, on defense always seem to outperform recruiting rankings.
Mhm.
Um, Offensively, that's a whole different story.
Right.
Uh, so that's an interesting one too. I think I'd give it like talent wise though. I think
I think
Michigan State
MSU, yeah.
has a more talented roster than
Mhm.
Iowa's. Rutgers, I think it's Michigan State, no doubt.
Mhm.
Michigan has a more talented roster than Michigan State. That's pretty clear. Minnesota, I would give the edge to Michigan State.
Yeah.
Nebraska, I would give the edge to Michigan State. I think Matt Rule has some work to do with that roster. It's going to take
Mhm.
him a little while to get that going. Ohio State, obviously, has a better roster than Michigan State. Indiana, Michigan State has a better roster.
Mhm.
Penn State, I would say Penn State has the better roster.
Yeah.
So there you go. That's how we would. So based on if roster talent was all that mattered, start at the beginning. 1-0, 2-0, 2-1, close though against Washington. I'll give them Maryland. So 3-1. Iowa 4-1. Rutgers 5-1. Michigan 5-2. Minnesota 6-2. Nebraska 7-2. Ohio State 7-3. Indiana 8-3. Penn State 8-4. If roster talent was all that matters, I would say you could expect 8 wins for Michigan State. But again, you're gonna throw in road games like at Iowa. That's a tough place to play.
Mhm.
At Minnesota, that's going to be a tough one. So, um, and yeah, like roster cohesion is a huge part of it too, like in chemistry and things like that.
Right.
But yeah, that was a fun question. So appreciate that. Do we have a field goal kicker yet? Again, Jonathan Kim from North
Yeah,
Carolina?
Kim.
He's
Yep.
going to be joining this summer. Um, that's going to be one of those battles that we'll see. Steven Rusnick, I think, was on campus during spring practice. He
Mhm.
was kind of he was on roster last year. So yeah, he'll compete for kicking roles. That's going to be one of those like special teams is one of those question marks that's going to have to be answered this year. So um, another one from Kyle. I think QB room is more motivated than it has been because the job is open. I think we see a hungry quarterback. As long as we get 9 to 10 linemen to play consistently, we're going to be extremely pleased. Yeah, I'm encouraged by just the numbers that Michigan State has at the offensive line. I think I trust Chris Kaplovich. I think he's recruited. I think he's found guys who are under recruited and brought them in and has been coaching those younger guys up. And we've seen that with Ethan Boyd, Gino Vandemark, like some of these guys who were the early commits for Kaplovich once he got here are starting to make their way into the rotation. So again, I don't know specifically what that's going to look like this year or how much of a leap they're going to be able to make or a jump. But I think that position group is trending in the right direction, and that's going to be huge for this program going forward. You have to be solid in the line of scrimmage. Um, so yeah, that's something to keep an eye on for this year as well. Well, we're over an hour. Aiden, do you have any final thoughts on any of the topics that we discussed today?
No, I mean, just yeah, wrapping up the O-line thing, I do think Kapilovic, they do have a good mix
Yep.
now of veterans and young players and kind of that freshman talent. They did recruit some JUCO players. I think they have a really good mix in terms of guys, and now that they're all healthy, I think you should see a large improvement in terms of line play, which will help the running game a lot more. And the passing their passing game was all right last season, but yeah, you should definitely see a lot more return in the run game.
Yeah, I agree. I like the guys that they've got in the backfield with Nathan Carter, Jalen Berger another year in the system, Jaron Mangum in those short yardage situations. Maybe beyond that if he expands his role too. So yeah, there's some reason for optimism. I think that's where we're going to wrap it. Just thank you guys for tuning in. A couple more comments here. See if there's a question. Thanks for topics. Appreciate that, Cameron. And Keys to Wisdom for just filling our comment section and giving us some things to talk about. We always appreciate that. Appreciate you guys tuning in. If you're watching on Facebook, please go ahead over to our YouTube channel. It's at Spartan Nation Podcast. Hit the subscribe button. Obviously, there's no cost for that. It's just whenever we put out a video, it'll be in your feed. If you're watching on YouTube, head over to Spartan Nation on Facebook, like and follow our page. We appreciate that. Thank you guys, and we'll see you next time.